Welcome, everyone, to a new edition of Remixing Politics and Culture with me, your host, Pam. And I am a public relations and marketing professional who has a passion for social justice, voter advocacy, and culture. And tonight, we are going to discuss the aftermath of Roe versus Wade, the overturning of it by the Supreme Court. And with me, I have is a wonderful lady, an attorney. I'm going to bring her up now as I introduce her to you. We have as our special guest, Narissa Smith. Narissa is a lawyer, speaker, professor, and journalist. For over a decade, Narissa worked as a law professor. She taught criminal law, U.S. constitutional law, and classes such as critical race theory. As a result, Narissa understands the many ways that the American legal system perpetuates racism, sexism, and other forms of inequality. She also possesses a deep knowledge of African American history and is a sought after speaker in the subject. Narissa is a twice graduate of some proud HBCUs. She is a summa cum laude graduate of Spelman College and a magna cum laude graduate of Howard University School of Law. Thank you, Marissa, for coming tonight.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm so glad to see you. So glad to see you.
Yes, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me. I am so excited. I'm so excited for this conversation. So I can't wait to get to it.
All right. So, Narissa, it
Yes,
has
ma'am.
been a crazy 2 weeks.
That is an understatement. Yes, it is.
It has been a crazy 2 weeks of the aftermath of Roe versus Wade. And really, I feel like I'm in a ball of confusion, to be honest. Every day is something new. It's something new. So, can you tell us how many states so far have said that they've banned abortion, or they've just are saying they had trigger laws or whatever? It's so confusing because there's so many of them.
Yeah, and the correct answer to that is actually it changes day to day. And the number that are expected to ban or severely limit abortion is going to be 26 if all of these what they call trigger laws go into effect. So here's the story that people need to know.
Okay.
This did not happen overnight. And I want to come back to this because there has been a movement in conservative, anti-woman, anti-Black circles to get rid of a lot of things.
Yes.
And abortion has been at the top of their list for a number of years. And this didn't just happen one day. So we can go all the way back to when Roe came down in January 1973. Next year would have been the 50th anniversary had it lived that long.
Right.
But when Roe came out, from that moment, basically, there was a slow campaign started. And so it went through the courts. And what they did was they chipped away and they chipped away and they chipped away at the right to abortion in several cases. That was their main tactic of what they were doing. And that is how we got to where we are now, coupled with some really shady actions by the Senate in terms of the judges they allowed to get on the court during the Trump administration. So, and who they didn't let on during the Obama administration. That's where we are. And because of that, Roe is now gone. Part of that lead up that I was telling you is that in a lot of states, they passed laws that said in the event that Roe versus Wade is overturned, abortion will be outlawed in this state. So there are a number of states that have, as I said, 26 total. But here's the thing that's interesting. Florida, for example, their trigger law hasn't gone into effect just yet. Well, at least the last time I checked, which I think was Friday. I didn't check again today, but they are fighting it in the Florida courts on the basis of the Florida Constitution. And so they're
Uh-huh.
saying the United States Constitution might not, but the Florida Constitution has some other provisions that
Mhm.
might still protect this right. So
Mhm.
that has sort of become the next line of defense for folks trying to say, they said, well, the Supreme Court said leave it to the states. Let's look at what these state constitutions say. So some of them, they paused temporarily and didn't go into effect. Texas's went into effect, I think, on July the 1st without much fanfare. So it really depends. I wish I could give a better answer, but it
Mhm.
depends on where you are and when it's going to go into effect. Texas has already gone into effect. I believe South Carolina already has. If not, it's going to go into effect soon. Like I just mentioned about Florida, kind of has that temporary pause on it. But it's going to be a very difficult landscape
Mhm.
for a lot of women, and particularly women of color. That's the
Right.
bottom line. It's
Right.
so we're going to have to watch the news, pay attention to
Mhm.
what's going on, and make sure that you take care of your reproductive health in terms of tracking your periods, if you're straight, making sure that your male partner is taking all the precautions he needs to take to prevent pregnancy as well. So all of these things, that have to, be in play so that you don't find yourself in a situation where you may have to travel to another state to get a procedure that you want or need.
Right. Very good. Stacy Hill says that Trump talked about doing this during his campaign, and
He
that is
sure
correct.
did. Yeah, and for the Republicans who have run for years on appointing conservative justices. And
Mhm.
folks can say, well, I didn't believe they would actually overturn Roe. There is this group called the Federalist Society.
Yes.
That's one of
Yes.
them. And there are a
Yes.
couple other, the Cato Institute. There's a lot of these big DC players, the Heritage Foundation, these different groups.
Mhm.
And
But the
they have been,
Federalists are very powerful.
oh, they
Extremely
absolutely
so.
are. They
Mhm.
have been recruiting and training lawyers to become judges since, oh gosh, it's been so long. I don't even know how long they've been doing this. But basically, that's been their strategy, is to say,
Mhm.
we're going to put people on the bench, get them on the lower federal courts first,
Mhm.
then get them to be appellate justices so they can be eligible for the Supreme Court. And
Right.
then
Right.
they'll overturn Roe. They'll do all these other things. If y'all think this is bad, it's going to get worse. Affirmative action is going to be the next thing to go, and the Voting Rights Act is also up next term, and that's going to be the next 1-2 punch.
Well,
So
the
just
Voting Rights Act, they've been chipping away at that all along, that
yep.
they've severely weakened it already. But it's almost like for us, Narissa, the Democrats have been playing checkers and the Republicans have always been playing chess. And so it seems like our we have not been thinking. We always thought, well, it's we have this in the Supreme Court has done this, and so whoever heard of anything being overturned? Never in our 246-year history has anything that we had as a right taken away from us.
Well,
So
oh, I'm sorry.
that's
Go ahead.
the business of it all. Yeah, I wanted to get into
Well, can I
President.
respond to what you just said,
Yeah,
though?
sure,
Yeah, because
absolutely.
here's the thing about what you just said. There's 2 points to it that I think we have to talk about when we talk about this. Uh,
Hmm.
well, actually, 3 things. Number one, the Supreme Court has never really been in the business of protecting rights. They really, for the most part of their history, they've been about restricting rights. That's
Hmm.
been a lot of their story. There are people who've written about this for years, and they call it the counter majoritarian theory, right?
Hmm.
However, I think that voters have to take some blame too. And here's why.
Hmm.
Because if you look at when I taught constitutional law, I did for many years. I always told students, when you are growing up in this country, you always think that the president is, you know, like if he was a superhero, you think he's Superman. The president can just do anything, wave a magic wand, and no, that's not how it works. I said, really, Congress is Superman. They're the ones with all the money and all the powers to make laws. That's what we want, right? The president, I say, is more like Aquaman. He's only powerful in limited situations. If there's a war, the president has a lot of power. But the president's biggest domestic power, in my opinion, is the power to appoint the attorney general, the secretary of state, those people, and the justices. And because we have lost sight of that, people get to the point where they say, oh, well, you know, I'm not happy about Biden not doing anything about gas prices. Well, that's not anything the president constitutionally has the power to do. But the president has the power to appoint Supreme Court justices. And back in 2016, I had a lot of conversations with a lot of people who didn't like Hillary Clinton. And I said, it's all about the courts. If the courts fall, it doesn't matter what else happens. And I know I'm talking a lot, but I want to really say this. The Constitution is the law of the land because it says it is. But the Constitution only says what the Supreme Court says it does. So if the Supreme Court says, as they did, that there is no fundamental right in the Constitution to abortion that they can make every state comply with, then that's now the law of the land. And that is serious. So if we want to change this, what we have to do is we have to go and vote. And it is now more important than ever. If the Supreme Court says this is a matter that they want to leave to the states, you better go and vote so that the people in your state will vote and do what they need to do to protect your rights.
Okay. Well, let me say
the states, we got to do that.
Okay. David Liggins had this big comment here, and I want to get it in. He says, I'm nowhere well versed as Madam Smith is, only can give a layman's opinion. I thought the Supreme Court decisions were final and the last step in the judicial process. To turn back Roe v. Wade, I think will open the door to changing decisions on education, interracial and same-sex marriages, and civil rights, a sad commentary on our country.
Yeah, I think Mr. Liggins, unfortunately, I think you hit the nail on the head. And the reason why we know you're right is because Clarence Thomas, who did not write the majority opinion, Alito did.
Yeah.
He said that, oh, yeah, you know, in Thomas's concurrence, he said, not only is there no fundamental right to abortion, and I could get into all the legalese of how they come up with the fundamental rights jurisprudence, but that's a little bit beyond this.
Yeah.
But he's saying, not only would I find that there's no fundamental right to privacy that would allow abortion, I also find it for same-sex marriage. So he mentioned the case they just decided a few years ago, Obergefell, and all these other things. I think he name checked maybe Lawrence v. Texas, which says basically, you know, that right to engage in any sort of sexual activity in your own privacy of your home.
Right.
Yeah, all of that is up for debate. Notice, though, we were pointing out, he didn't mention Loving versus Virginia, which protects interracial marriage, because he himself is in an interracial marriage. Like, yeah, take a look at that, if you will. But the hypocrisy is staggering. But no, you're right. This door is open and it's very scary. But I will say, I think the most immediate thing that we'll probably see before we see an attack on same-sex marriage itself, we're going to see it being used to perhaps erode different rights for folks in the LGBT plus community. We're going to see that first. And we're also going to see a restriction of access to things like contraception, because what people don't realize, and I was telling people this for years, way before I said, people who don't like Roe need to understand Roe is important, not just for abortion, but because in really saying that there's a constitutional right to privacy, there was a case before it called Griswold that said that you married couples had the right to use contraceptive devices. Did you know that that was not always a constitutional right?
I
Yet,
didn't learn that till the other week when I was doing another show, and I thought, this is insane. Who
yeah,
was in people's bedrooms about whether you're using contraception or not? I mean, that's
exactly.
crazy. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's been very difficult, to get people to understand that our rights. This is the first time. I wouldn't say, going back to what you said, I wouldn't say this is the first time in like the 240 some years, but this is a big one, because this is one. Whenever I talk about the Constitution, people like to talk about like super precedents that people thought would like stand the test of time and never be overturned. Brown is one.
Mm-hmm.
Roe is another. Miranda is another one. And
Oh, you know what? That's a whole nother thing. Let me read this real quick. Stacy says, after casting a vote, we have to hold these people accountable. And then she had another comment. Can some of the laws be changed? But
oh yeah, I agree with Stacy 100%. We have to vote and hold people accountable, but we also have to give the people we vote for the tools to do their job, right? So it's a both and. So let me give an example. When Obama ran in '08 and got elected, the huge thing that he ran on was Obamacare. He was like, I'm going to
yes,
get health care. I'm going to reform the healthcare system.
yes.
Obama had, at that time, in his first 2 years, right? He had a Democratic Senate and a Democratic House, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
55 in the Senate, and he had a majority in the House. I'm coming back to 55 for a reason. He was able to get that huge law, life-changing, life-saving law passed.
Mm-hmm.
He had the tools to do it. So
Because we voted people in to do it.
exactly. But if Obama, having had a Democratic majority in the Senate and a Democratic majority in the House, had then said, oh, I don't care about health care, I'm going to focus on, expanding the war in Iraq, we would have been like, wait a second, that's not what we voted for you for. We voted for you to end that war and do health care, right? And so he had the tools to do it. And if he had not used those tools, definitely accountability. But when you can do the same thing with Bill Clinton, elected in 92, said, I'm going to make it easier for folks to vote. He and Hillary tried to put a health care plan together, which the Republicans killed. That's a much longer story. Those of y'all who are too young to remember that, look it up. It's very fascinating. It's still why a lot of people hate Hillary, because she dared to do something. But another thing that this little Newt Gingrich comes in, and he gets what they call this Republican wave. They overtake the House. Clinton couldn't do anything for the rest of his 8 years. And then they impeached him, which is a whole other thing. Obama, 2010, the Tea Partiers come through, and the Republicans take over the House and then the Senate again. And this keeps happening. Whenever I talk to people and they're like, well, I don't see why I need to vote because things never change.
Oh, please.
Reason why things never change is because we as voters don't consistently show up and vote, and the Republicans depend on us not showing up.
Yeah, because they think that they've got it made in the bag this midterm, because every time in the midterms, if it's not the presidential race, people don't think it's important to vote. Narissa, that's why I even started this whole podcast, was because I woke up one January, in January this year, and I thought, oh my God, it's the midterms. And I had been thinking about doing this anyway, because I have that this Black women's political group on Facebook. And I thought, Pam, don't worry about it being perfect. I'm a perfectionist. Just do it. Just do it. Do something. Because if we stay stuck, we don't do anything. And at least when stuff is on video, you can share it with somebody else. My whole thing is to get people to open up and think what's going to be in the best interest of yourselves, of us as a people. And we have to vote. We have to vote, and we have to do other things too. But in simplest terms, we have to vote in our best interest, because look at how we're killing each other. We don't have to worry about Russia and these other countries. We're tearing our own selves up from within with domestic terrorism. you
Yes,
know.
we are. And I'm glad that you said domestic terrorism because that's exactly what it is.
Hmm.
And I wish that we would talk more about it like that. But because most of these people with guns are young white men,
Hmm.
they want to have these sympathy, there's like, oh, he was a troubled young man. And the
Hmm.
thing about you hear then about these young black and brown folks who've gone to school, had all these terrible home situations, get
Hmm.
bullied at school by the teachers and all these other things. And you're like, well, how they go through all this terror, and they're not shooting up, like public places. And I think that what we have to do as a country too is to look at what it is about this country that is raising up these young white men to behave in this way. And we're not really having this conversation
Hmm.
because nobody wants to admit that there's a problem. And I don't
Hmm.
know if you're old enough to remember, there was this thing called the Moynihan Report, like way back.
Oh yes, dear.
And they
Oh
went
yes.
through all these
I
things,
have
like
looked
talking about
through the
all the
Monument
problems of the
Report.
black family and how the
Yes,
black folks were so messed up and blah, blah, blah.
yes,
And
yes,
they've done it with
yes.
some other, I want to say that there's one they did on Native Americans that's similar, but it's like, you look at all of that, and the word that the experts use is pathologizing, right? Whenever a
Mhm.
black person does something, it's the fault of the black community. It's the black community that, is failing. We don't get married, single mothers, all these other things. When if you look at the reality, the answer is racism. Like, I don't know if you watch Blackish, but there's this very funny thing, like, what's the answer to everything? Slavery. Like, you can trace it, like any black people problem with that episode is like you can trace it back to slavery. And really, at the root and at the base of a lot of our problems are not just slavery and segregation, but the fact that we have not been appropriately compensated for all of that through reparations, but also that psychic trauma and the trauma that we still live with being black in this country, of knowing that at any point in time, our bodies, our families, can be changed in an instant, whether it's from, some, police officer, some crazy gunman, some gang violence, whatever it might be, we just don't really feel safe. But
Mhm.
that makes me angry too, because, when there was that shooting at that parade in the Chicago suburbs, I read about it, and all the people were like, well, we thought this was a nice, safe place. We didn't think
Mhm.
things like that happened
Happy here.
here.
Yeah.
And this is not to take away from them, because I know they were traumatized, and it traumatized me to read about it, and the little baby who both of his
I
parents,
know. Yeah.
it got to me. But the idea that in America, you're okay with people getting shot as long as it's not in your quote
Your
unquote good
neighborhood. Right.
neighborhood,
Right.
that's the idea that we have to change. And there's
Exactly.
a certain segment of Americans who don't realize that we're all in this together.
We
And
are.
if some of us are doing badly, all of us are doing badly.
Right.
They've been content to think as long as I'm okay, everybody's okay. And we can't afford to think like that anymore.
Right. Let me catch you here. Stacy had a question. Can some of the laws be changed?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And some of the things that could happen. Now, I'm going to go for, and I know he said he's not going to do it, but politicians say they're not going to do a lot of things until they do. Uh, One thing that is interesting to me is that there's a possibility of expanding the Supreme Court. There
Yes.
is no law that says there has to be 9 people on the
No.
Supreme Court.
Right.
And if there are Democrats in Congress, well, first of all, before I get too far into this, I have to say we got to talk about the F word. And the F word is filibuster. And
Yes.
the
Yeah.
filibuster is the most evil thing in the Senate. The Constitution does not require a filibuster. It does allow the House and the Senate to create their own rules. So, a rule they created in the Senate was, well, you can filibuster a law if you don't want to see it changed. So that means you have to get a certain number of votes,
Hmm.
right, in order to invoke what they call a cloture motion to move it to a vote. So in the Senate, that's 60 votes. the filibuster, and there are people who have chronicled this far more than I have time to hear, has historically been used to stop the rights of Black and brown people and women. Strom Thurmond and all those segregationists used to get on the floor of Congress and they would talk for hours to try to keep people from having rights. Now they don't require you to get up there and do that anymore, but they still require 60 votes. But we just said, how many Democrats do we have in Congress? There's 50. So that's 10 shy of that number to break the filibuster. However, right, there is also a thing in the Senate, the way their rules are set up, you only need 50 senators to vote to change the rules. We got 2 Democrats that aren't willing to break the filibuster. But everybody, I don't know where folks who are listening are based. I know that both Pam and I are based in North Carolina. If you're in North Carolina, please vote for Judge Beasley, for Cindy. Please do that, because that would make a big difference. If you live in Pennsylvania, please vote for Fetterman. Do not let Dr. Oz come to the United States.
Oh, he doesn't even live in Pennsylvania. He's in New Jersey.
Exactly. He wrote down the wrong town on his thing because he can't even spell the name right of the town that he's allegedly supposed to live in Pennsylvania. But that's what they're doing because they're trying to, do that same Trump playbook of, oh, we'll just get a celebrity and get that person because they have name recognition.
Right.
It's sad. It sometimes can work. It worked for Trump, but a lot of other things were in Trump's favor as well, namely the fact that I don't think that people have really started to study the white rage that was unleashed when Obama became elected. A lot of white folks were really angry about that, and Trump sort of, turned that anger into something, that became a political motivation.
Okay, let's get to, we've got a lot to get to.
I'm sorry. I just love talking. I see there's a question.
Listen, no problem at all, Larissa. We want to keep your energy up, and we got things going on. Black Women in Artificial Intelligence asks, what do we do beyond the vote?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. And I do think that there are things. I do think that folks should continue to protest. That's number one. I think that we have to protest and vote. I think some folks have made the mistake of protesting instead of voting. I think you can do both. I think we have to do both. I think we have to let people know how we feel. That's one thing. However, I will say I have to put voting at the top because I saw that folks were protesting outside of Kavanaugh's house. And all I could think was, God bless y'all, but Supreme Court justices do not care about protests. It's a lifetime appointment. You can't protest them out of office. You can't pressure them to resign. You can't even, as we saw with this, you can't even pressure them into changing their vote. They don't care. And the Constitution was designed so that they wouldn't care, right? Our best tool is to vote. Get Biden the help that he needs. That's number one. Number two, beyond voting though, campaigns cost money. So I would say donating to different political campaigns, but more than that, donate to not just Planned Parenthood, even though I do think that they're good to donate to Mississippi Women's Reproductive, but like those places that are in areas where there's a high concentration of Black women and where they're being deprived of abortion access, donate money to those places. If you are, I know, and this is just starting to happen, but there will soon be like volunteers and other people like drive people to, to get abortions and other services in other states. Those are volunteering in that sort of way is another thing to do. I think that look at the kind of talent that you have and see, what you can do. If you're an artist, you can, make art around it. You can do graphics around it. If you are a singer, there's whatever your talents are, there's a way to help on these and all other kinds of issues.
Right. Let me ask you this, and that's getting to the whole thing that you're talking about with doing the volunteer driving people to various places and whatnot. Here's my question about that is that it's almost, you know, how Texas passed this law
Hmm.
that they said that you could be a snitch and you'll get paid for snitching on
Hmm.
somebody who may be pregnant and travels to get an abortion. But my question is, whatever happened to the HIPAA laws and all of that stuff?
See, the HIPAA laws apply to the doctor's offices,
No,
right?
it applies to social services agencies,
Yeah,
everybody who has all that's, you know, who has, you know, private information and what have you.
and that is true. But the other things are, if they're looking, if you say this is what these laws are going to, so let's say that, you know, you are a mom, right? And
Mhm,
your daughter comes to you and tells you that she wants to have an abortion, and you, as the mom, tell your sister, the aunt, right? And then the
mhm,
aunt tells the authorities, right? That
mhm.
is technically outside of HIPAA because it's not in one of those like clinical type settings, right?
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think that that's what the Texas law is kind of hoping that will happen. Now, I also don't know, and I need to check on this, what the status of that particular law is now that abortion has been banned in the state.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
So it's a whole new world legally.
It is a whole new world.
This is very new, and it's also going to be new, to think about, how do we talk about marriage, which is also a fundamental right, one of the first
Mhm,
ones that they said,
mhm.
the right to raise your children how you want to. So
Right.
there's a lot of fundamental rights that are going to. This is going to be interesting. This is going to be interesting few years.
Yes, yes, it's stressful. Okay,
Mhm.
so we got another question here. Stacy had put some suggestions out about sending emails to state and local representatives, get involved in community groups and what have you. This question here is, what do you say to the people who have said, okay, I voted, and you keep telling me to vote for Democrats, but nothing has changed?
And then I would keep saying, okay, again, let me go back. Let me paint a picture, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna go
Paint
back
the
in time in
picture.
the time machine again, because I can't
Mm-hmm.
say this enough. Uh, I do believe, as I was telling Miss Pam before we started this, the most important election of my lifetime happened before I was born. And
Mm-hmm.
that was the election in 1968.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1968, for those of you who don't know, it was Richard Nixon running for the very first time. And that was a very tumultuous election year. Dr. King was killed in April of that year. Bobby
Bobby
Kennedy, who was a
Kennedy,
Democratic frontrunner, was killed in August of that year, right after
was
the
it
California
August?
primary. Yeah. And so all of those things happened, right? And also was about the Vietnam War. So there was a
Mhm,
split in the party, right? There
mhm,
was a
mhm,
split in the Democratic Party about who to support, and people wanted to get away from the war. And if you watch the movie
mhm,
about the Chicago 7, you get a lot more about that. However, all of that drama on the Democratic side, Nixon sails to an easy victory, right? And
mhm.
I'm going to come back to Nixon's part in this.
Who was running against him? Was it Herbert Humphrey?
Yep,
Herbert Humphrey?
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it was the McGovern folks versus the Humphrey folks, and that was all that drama on the
I
Democratic
remember
side.
that. I remember reading about that. Yeah.
So here's what happens. And you get Nixon in 68. Nixon resigns in 74 over Watergate.
Right.
Gerald Ford fills out the rest of his term. Carter
Right.
gets elected in 76. He only gets 4 years. Not a
Right.
lot, too much happens there. Reagan and Bush get the next 12 years, right?
12.
12 years. That's a long time,
That's a
especially
long
for
time.
judges on the bench.
Hmm.
Then you get Bill Clinton in 92 to break this up. Then, like I said, he had a Democratic majority for those first 2 years.
Hmm.
Then the Republicans came and took over.
Hmm.
And he couldn't get anything done for the rest of the 8 years, for the six remaining years. Then George W. Bush steals the election in 2000, right?
Georgie Bush
Yep, and
support
all of
this
that.
vote.
And
Bush.
it was just a ridiculous, ridiculous thing that happened. And, you know, he has all the Republican support that he needs. Obama in '08 gets elected, has a Democratic majority for the first 2 years. What happens again? Those Tea Party folks come in
Midterms.
2010 in the midterm elections, and he doesn't have a Democratic majority for the rest of his term. So the answer to the question from Black women in artificial intelligence is the people who say, okay, I voted, you keep telling me to vote for Democrats, is folks keep saying that, but folks are, I would just say, as the kids would say, is capped, because folks have not been voting the way that they need to vote, because we have to turn out in every single election, whether it
Down
is
the ballot.
down the ballot, whether it's every 4 years for president, the odd year elections locally for your mayor, for your governor, whoever, midterm elections like this year. These are the most important ones, because this is what makes the Congress that the president is going to get.
Right.
So the reason why things never change is because for Democratic presidents, for the ones that we've had over the past, I just went through about 40 years of history, right? Going back to Jimmy Carter to now, this is about what, 45 years ish, right? 46 years. In that 46 years that I just talked about, there was a total of 8 years where the Democrats had the presidency, the House, and the Senate. And half of those were in Jimmy Carter's 4 years. That is the problem that we have. We cannot just say, oh, I voted for president, my job is done. Woo, Lord. No, things don't change because we don't keep the pressure on with our votes.
Right.
We vote and then we go home, be like, oh, there was an election on, and that's why we keep getting into this cycle.
Exactly.
Not to mention, we have to vote at the state and local levels. We have to, especially because if their Supreme Court is now going to turn all of these rights over to the states, right? Then we have to make sure that we have people in charge of these states that are going to do the things that are going to benefit us.
Right.
That's what
Absolutely.
we have to do. So I appreciate the question, and I understand that it seems frustrating sometimes, but if you look at it in historical context, it really tells a different story. And really, since '08, since Obama, was elected, we have become, here's the other thing that people miss. We have become a very powerful voting group. Back in the 70s and 80s, and my undergraduate degree is in political science. And when I wrote my thesis, one of the things I wrote a couple of different thesis papers and about the importance of Black voter turnout and how it changes when there's a Black candidate. One of the things that's important with that is, yes, come out and vote for president. Yes, vote when there is, a Black person on the ballot, but that can't be the only reason why we come out. We have to come out like our lives depend on it, because right now, quite frankly, they kind of do.
They they do. And it also, if we don't vote, we may not have a democracy. At the rate this is going, we will really be the handmaid's tale.
We're almost there. We're taking a big step toward that reality.
Absolutely. And which brings me to this interesting subject. We've kind of gone around, we talked so much.
I'm having fun. This is great.
Listen, I hope the audience is, guys, hit that like button if you're on YouTube and hit subscribe. Okay, so here's the thing that I really wanted to talk about, and I hope our men in the audience are listening. Obviously, only women can carry a baby, right? We all know the birds and the bees, but it takes two to tango. So hear me out. What about the men? I am so sick of hearing about and just feeling frustrated as a woman because we don't have agency over our own bodies of what we discuss in a doctor's office for whatever reason. I can't deal with that. Here's the thing. How are we going to make men take greater accountability?
Oh, boy.
Because if we are going to get prosecuted, are they going to get to have forced vasectomies?
Of course not.
Are they going to be forced? What happened to that birth control that they were supposed to be working on for men? I thought China or Japan or somebody in Asia had some idea.
And they've been working on it here too. But here's the thing with that. if you have something that people won't use, it won't matter anyway. There's so much that goes into the question that you just asked. And this is where we get beyond the law and into our socialization, right? Because the thing about it is, law tends to codify what we think and believe, right? So, if we believe that killing people is wrong, then we make laws against it, right? The whole point of law is to codify our ideas of morality, right?
Right.
But what's happened, right, is because we have a certain number of people who are bent on having their version of a religion be codified. That's what we're having. But for years, no matter what society you look at, no matter what religion, women have been punished for having sexual activity, right? So women are punished for, if you're not, when I say punished, by the way, I don't mean like legally, like, but women are punished or ostracized for years. Oh, you dressed a certain way, it wasn't until I was like in the 90s that they actually had rape shield laws, right? Where they couldn't say, oh, well, this particular victim of a crime, they would bring in like the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even the early 90s, if a woman said she was a victim of rape, they would bring in other men that said that they had slept with her and do all of these things and try to tear down her reputation. There used to be a law where a woman had to fight back to prove that she was raped. And if she didn't like fight and injure the attacker, then there was no rape. Saying all of this to say that the way that we look at women has to change before we can make laws that will reasonably, make it so that men suffer under these same burdens. And that goes to, we talk about white privilege a lot, as we should, but there's a lot of privilege in this society that also comes along with being male, because men have been running societies for years, and they're not used to having people tell them what they can or cannot do with their bodies. Whereas women, for thousands of years, it's only really been quite recently that women have started to say, you know what, maybe I don't want to have a baby. The birth control pill came out in 1960. That's not that long. People who were born in 1960 are not that old. So that's the thing. So if someone born in 1960 wouldn't even be 70 years old yet.
No.
So the idea is, if you are out here and you are used to, and you've been socialized from a little girl, don't dress like that, or if you have sex out of wedlock, or you have sex with multiple guys, or you're a slut, about the way that this goes less to law and more the way that we raise our kids, and what kind of messages are we giving to them? Do we tell our sons the same things that we tell our daughters, about how to behave, themselves in, sexual relationships that might produce a child? That's what we have to start to do to get this ball rolling
in the right
and
direction.
to make sure, that this, so we can, prepare young boys to understand that, yes, if you help to create a child, you have exactly the same amount of responsibility, and, care towards, not just financially providing for, but actually parenting and caring for that child, whether, you're married or a co-parent or whatever. But we're not quite at that point yet.
Well, this, to me, Roe v. Wade makes us have to hurry up and speedily get there. David says, if men could no longer have vasectomies or non-use of condoms became illegal, men will hit the ceiling. Hypocrisy at its best. Yeah, I mean, if you're not going to have people, if you're going to be in the doctor's office and say they can't have abortion, they can't have abortion care or contraception or whatever. I mean, what do you want? It's like, because they're not going to have people not have sex. That horse has been out the barn for too long. And our
Yes.
society is so hypersexualized. It's crazy.
And what's interesting about that too is I think that on the part of these Republicans, right? Oh yes, there's white men. Absolutely, she took the words right out of my mouth. I was literally just about to say that white men in this country, because it's all about what they're doing is to preserve white patriarchy.
Yes,
And
yes.
please don't sleep on the fact that this whole decision in Dobbs, which overturned Roe,
Mm-hmm.
is about controlling women overall, but particularly white women. And here's what I mean.
Exactly.
There has
Because they're
been
not having children. They just are
exactly.
not having children. And that's when, you know what, and here again, here's where we're getting into this replacement theory thing. The
Oh,
browning of America is going to happen, period, point blank, period. But nobody wants to replace you, boo. We
no,
just want to live.
no.
We would not, Black people in this country, and I'll just say it for all of us, we do not wish to enslave, demean, degrade, make you 3/5 of a person. We have no desire to do that. We just want to live.
Yeah, but I think that a
Period.
lot of folks, it's not even about that for them. I think for some, it's about the fear of like
Mm-hmm.
the physical fear or the big scary black man or the
Yeah.
angry black woman is going to come after me. I do think that there's some of that. But really, I think at a more fundamental level, I think the bigger fear or anger, I like to describe it like this. So imagine, you have this job, and it's super easy. All you got to do is just kind of show up, right? But then your job kind of gets harder. Other people start showing up and
Mm-hmm.
they're doing a better job than you, so then you have to work kind of harder. And so
Mm-hmm.
white men had everything in terms of jobs on lock for hundreds of years, right? So think about
Right.
1776. The African folks were, enslaved. Native folks were trying to run their own tribes until they all got decimated, and pushed
Yes.
off onto reservations. So here's what happens with this, right? We have these white men who are threatened by the idea that they have to share power with other people. So black
Mm-hmm.
men get the right to vote in 1870 when the 15th Amendment is passed.
Right.
And then they get angry about that because at one point the South Carolina state legislature was majority black, like in the 1800s, and people don't
Yeah.
know it.
Yeah.
They start passing grandfather clause laws.
Mm-hmm.
You can only vote if your grandfather could vote. Nobody who was enslaved had a grandfather that could vote. Oh, you
Exactly.
got to pay a poll tax. Those
Right.
sharecroppers couldn't afford poll taxes.
Right.
You got to pass a literacy test. You might
Right.
think, well, that makes sense that you got to read. No, they were. How many angels can dance on the head of a pin? How many bubbles in a bar? So those are the kinds of questions that they literally asked all of the time, right? And so one of the first things white folks did was to make sure that they took away black men's right to vote. And I'm saying that very specifically because black women didn't get the right to vote until the 19th Amendment came.
Right.
But all of that to say that when black men got that vote, it was taken away very quickly. White men were not happy about sharing power. And then if you look at segregation, right, and
Mm-hmm.
you see that segregation in the South, it was there, and part of it was there to make sure that as a black person, you didn't start to feel like you were better than, or not even better than, just equal to.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of us have heard stories in our family, or we say, you think you uppity, like who do you think you are? And we
Mm-hmm.
now know like what happened in Tulsa. So
Mm-hmm.
there's been this long history of white men being very angry. And then white women started entering the workforce a lot more
Mm-hmm.
in the 60s and 70s. That made them angry as well. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like it just used to be good enough for me to show up as a white man. I didn't have
Mm-hmm.
to do that much. I was here. Everybody just assumed I was. Now, I can't be patting women on their bottoms. I can't
Right.
tell my racial jokes. I got to be here and I have to. It's like, well, yeah, you do, because we're all here. We're all trying to work together. And just
Mm-hmm.
because you're a white man doesn't give you the right, to try to run over me. There
Mm-hmm.
are a lot of people who are still, believe it or not, just angry that they have to share this space or that they have to change their behavior. You ever hear these comedians, especially white male comedians? Some you hear some black male comedians too. Like, I miss the good old days when we could just say whatever we wanted to.
Yes, I have heard that.
Yeah, no, we don't. Who's missing the good? When was the good old days? I don't know when them good old days were. Like
Mm-hmm.
what? Good old days? What? When Obama was president? Good old days? What? Like,
Mm-hmm.
because if you're black, you're not going back too far in that time machine to talk about when the good old days,
Mm-hmm.
were. So I'm just to answer the question. I know this was a long-winded answer. We have to protect our rights at every turn. If the election is in November. If you got to get in line now to vote, you better get in line now to vote. If you
Mm-hmm.
need to put in a request to take the day off now, you need to do it. This is an all hands on deck situation because,
Mm-hmm.
you
The
know,
house is burning, and
mhm,
I mean, this is no joke. I mean,
mhm.
all of your rights are literally and figuratively on the line. And
Oh yeah,
America as we know it, as
yeah,
our forefathers
yeah,
fought for and thought that they had done something good, and they had done ginormous steps. But I think Thurgood Marshall is doing somersaults in his grave. I
mhm.
think I just can't even imagine.
Oh
And
yeah,
I know my mother said something about, I wish my grandmother was still here to see it. And to me, I'm glad that she's not. I don't want them to
yeah,
see this mess.
yeah,
David says, I think he's talking about guilt makes them feel that way. What they don't understand is that the majority of us, he means black folks, don't play tit for tat games. And we
yeah,
don't. Who
yeah,
cares? We just want to live. Again, we just
yeah.
want to live.
I've never heard like a serious group of black folks get together and say, yeah, we want revenge on white people. No, it's always
Never.
been about us trying to just be able to live where we want to live, send our
Yeah,
kids to school,
right,
just go to any store we want to go to and be
right.
served and treated. It's never been, our struggle has always been like, just, can I just go through life and like, maybe if I accidentally run a stop sign, can I not get shot because of that?
Exactly,
That's
exactly.
been our struggle. Our struggle has not been, let's see how we can get rid of white people. It's never been that.
Never,
That's
never.
never
And
been
have
our
no
goal.
desire to do that whatsoever. We all have, at this point, many of us have all types of friends of every ethnicity. And I think I prefer it that way. It's a wonderful life. You learn from so many different people. I don't want to hurt or harm anyone. It takes too much negative energy to spew that kind of hatred. Who has time for it? We don't have time
Absolutely.
for that. We don't,
Absolutely.
and no desire for it either. And Stacy says a very, very true point. Very true. Affirmative action benefited white women more than anyone else. It
That
certainly
is very true. All the statistics
especially when
bear
you
that
come
out.
into the business contracts world,
Mhm.
where I one year I did a study of trying to find out how minority businesses were faring here in the area in Durham, how they had done with contracts and stuff. And we did find a few folks who had the wife was the front of the business because
You
she
hear about that a lot, don't you? Yeah.
oh yeah.
The
But
first
the
time I heard about that,
but
I was so
the men
shocked.
but the men were, it was their business, but and when you were asked her questions, there were just particular things she didn't know anything about. And I'm thinking, if you are running this business, you should know this, you know.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
it's been very interesting. But again, believe it or not, there are still white men who are resentful of even white women, the ones who actually make their own businesses, having that success because again, it's a threat to that
The
white
ego.
patriarchy.
Yeah.
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 So it's like this is you're a woman, your place is beneath me. And
Yes.
if you ever, step out of that, it's a threat. One of the most insightful things that I ever heard when I taught critical race theory, one of my white male students said, people
Where
really
did you
need
teach
to
it at, Narissa? Where did you
Central
teach?
at North Carolina Central
Oh,
and
okay.
also at
Okay.
Florida Coastal. And what's
Okay.
interesting though is that he said, said people really need to look at sexism. Said because if you're a white boy and people are telling you that your mother is underneath you. How
Mm,
easy is it to go from thinking your mother is beneath you to thinking all these other people that you don't even know are beneath you? And I just,
wow.
that just always stuck with me, is like, yeah, like if you start off on that line, like, I'm,
Mhm,
at the top, and women are beneath me, and it goes on from there. So we really need to be thinking about how to, not just when we talk about Black people, for far too long in our own community, Black people has been a synonym for, straight Black men. And we
mm,
have to be careful about that too, because what this Dobbs decision is highlighting is that Black women are going to be hurt so deeply by
mm,
this, and we have to support Black women. There's also, there's going to be things on the horizon. There's folks in the LGBT community who are very nervous about those little
mhm,
hints that Thomas dropped about whether or not their marriages or their right to adopt, their kids is going to continue in the future. So as a community, we have to take care of the whole community to be strong. And that's what we got to start looking at, and make sure that we all lift each other and one another up,
right.
regardless of any, differences we might have. This is the time to come together.
Right, right. Absolutely, absolutely. Judy Davis says, agreed. We just want to live in peace. Absolutely. I don't have time to be thinking about anybody, trying to harm anybody, think ill of my neighbors or whatever. I live in a very integrated little cul-de-sac, and I'm not thinking about going against my neighbors. Good grief.
But I think
Who has time?
But I think
Who
that
does
if
that?
you watch all of that Tucker Carlson and all of that stuff, and there's this group called Media Matters that I just love,
Yes.
and they keep track of this stuff. If you watch the news, you would
Mhm.
think that Black men are the most dangerous thing to ever hit the planet, since like killer bees or shark attacks or whatever,
Uh-huh.
because that's the propaganda that's put out there. And you know how Trump, like every 2 weeks, he would say it's caravans of folks
Yes,
coming up from
yes,
Mexico.
yes.
I'm still waiting for the caravan. They ain't here yet.
No,
But it's like, it's
please.
that fear, and putting and manipulating that fear.
That
And
narrative.
because, and it's funny what you just said, Miss Pam, because if all of these things, they say to white folks, I think
Mhm,
they work, because you just said you live in an integrated neighborhood. They did a
mhm,
study a few years back, and they said most white people only have like maybe one Black friend. But
mhm,
for Black folks, that's not the same, because we
mhm,
live in a world where we usually, like, we have to deal with a lot of different people. So if you don't know any Black people and you're listening to Tucker Carlson and you're watching the news and you're seeing all of this, you're like, oh my gosh, Black people are just so terrible. Oh my God. And so that fear resonates with you. I'm not saying this is right, but I'm saying
mhm,
it's harder to combat that fear when you can't say to yourself, well, hey, I know so and so and they're not like that, or I grew up
mhm,
with Black people and I know that's bunk, but that's what's missing. And I think that the sad thing that no one's talking about too is that our country is becoming more and more segregated. The public schools, I've been watching this, are
Oh,
more segregated than they've been almost
yeah,
since Brown.
yeah.
And people are not talking about that. They might talk about it on the anniversary of Brown or something like that, but folks aren't talking about it a lot. And
The
that is the
charter
thing.
schools have been used as our public tax dollars, really privatizing uh uh with privatizing schools with public tax dollars.
Oh yeah,
And
and they
it is
want to
just
take it another step further and give it to actual private schools. And the
no.
other decision they made when they said it was okay for that public school coach to pray with his players on the field, that
Yes.
was a big red flag to me, because it tells me the next time they hear a case like that, they're going to just open the floodgates and just say it's okay for states to just basically give money outright, to these private schools. They've been working up to that. But
Right,
yeah,
right.
I just
Yeah,
notice how a couple times I've said that the Republican strategy was to chip away and chip
yes.
away. They
And
didn't
that's
just
what they've
wake
been
up
doing.
one day. We
Yeah,
have to look at our thing the same way. We have to look
Exactly.
at it as Everest. We got to get a toehold and then a foothold and just keep going up. And
Right.
yes, we might fall. We got to keep climbing. They got knocked down too, but they kept climbing up. But what I have seen with far too many, especially not to be ageist, but of younger folks in particular,
Mm-hmm.
is, oh, well, Biden's not canceling student loans. My vote don't
Yeah.
matter. We got to stop that line. I think we got to think about it not as a one election cycle, but as 50 years down the line. My
Right.
kids, what kind of world do I want them to live in? And what sacrifices am I willing to make today so that they
Mm-hmm.
can have the world they want tomorrow? Because I'm telling y'all, remember, I threaded this needle along that 1968 election.
Yes.
When Richard Nixon became president, he appointed some folks to the Supreme Court that made some horrible decisions that
Mm-hmm.
helped to lay the groundwork for
Mm-hmm.
what they did
Mm-hmm.
today and
Mm-hmm.
for what they're going to do next term, especially with affirmative action.
Yes.
So, and this was the one primarily full of justices that Nixon picked,
Mm-hmm.
that said, oh, in order to have a claim for racial discrimination under the 14th Amendment, you have to prove intent. Intent is one of the hardest things to
That's
prove.
hard to prove
You can't
intent. You
prove
can't,
intent
how can you go inside somebody's heart or, or their
yeah,
brain or whatever and
yeah,
say,
it's almost
you
impossible to
intended?
prove. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they put us in these impossible circumstances and laid this groundwork that's going to pay off
Mm-hmm.
about 50 years later. It took them 50 years to get the things that they wanted. Affirmative action came around in Bakke. The Supreme
Yes.
Court said it was okay. That was like 77. And it's going to die, I promise, next term is going to be the end of Bakke. And they're going to say that not only where they left it last time was they said, oh, you can use affirmative action under certain guidelines. They're going to
Mm-hmm.
say, nope, you can't use any sort of race-based preferences. That's going to be devastating. Well, it's going to be devastating for Black folks at PWIs.
Mm-hmm.
They're already saying that admissions and applications at HBCUs have skyrocketed ever since
Yes.
Trump became president, and that's
Yeah.
going to keep happening. So, thank goodness for that. But I do think, though, that we have the right to. I love, obviously, I went to two of them. I love HBCUs, but
Mm-hmm.
we should have the
Well,
right
we
to
belong
go.
everywhere, wherever we feel like it. And we belong wherever we feel like it because not everybody can travel. Not
Yep,
everybody wants to go out of state. Not everybody,
exactly.
because look here in North Carolina, we have fabulous HBCUs, but we have some top tier PWIs too, and
Yeah,
they're right in the
exactly.
same area. So why can't we go? We can go wherever our talents take us. And it should
Exactly. And
not
that should be
matter.
our right.
It
And
is
to be
our,
treated
as
fairly
an
when you get there.
American, as
Yeah.
American citizens, it should absolutely be our right. Stacy she has something here that I mean, she asked, how do we encourage Black women to support each other? I mean, we just do.
Yeah.
We just do. We support each other. I think that you just be in organizations, or I think that whatever it is that you would like to see in a person, you have to resemble that.
Yeah.
So I would say in that case, if I want more people, more Black women to support other Black women, I have to be that Black woman that does support other Black women, you
Yeah.
know.
And not just that, but to also, I would add, call people out that are doing things that aren't supportive of Black women, like
Right.
especially going back to what I was saying about socialization. So, she's dressed like a slut or a thought or whatever. Call
Mhm.
people out on that. Like, well, what does that mean?
Uh-huh.
And it's like, I'm not talking about like if someone, like, even in a playful way, it's like to just kind of challenge that thinking that all of us have been ingrained with, to be harder on women than we are on men, because nobody says the things about men that people say about women. Nobody
Nope.
would say, if a man got his car broken into, they wouldn't say, well, was it a red car? Everyone knows red cars are great. Did
Right.
he leave the car unlocked? Like, that is not a
Right.
conversation
Right.
that men have, or that men would even tolerate. Right?
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
women are expected to talk about all these things, and also just to support women who are mothers in whatever
Mhm.
way. Motherhood is hard. So, just don't be judgmental of the women in your lives, and don't be judgmental of the women who choose not to be mothers. Because I think that's part of this too, of how we got here, is this idea that every woman has to be a mom or has to love being
Right.
a 24/7.
Right.
That's not reality. And I think
No.
that, the idea just to support one another, build communities of your friends and other sisters, and just lift one another up. I think it starts
Right.
there. I think most of us, I hope, are fortunate. A friend of mine, we had this conversation a few years ago and said, that whole thing about, they used to say behind every strong man, there's a strong woman. I said, well, who's behind the strong woman? So we thought
Exactly.
about it for a while. And then
Mhm.
she said, who's more other strong women
Yeah,
encouraging her on?
that's
And
right.
that's the only answer.
Right.
Unfortunately,
Right.
that's the idea, is that, whether I see somebody in the chat saying, whether it's in your industry, in your
Mhm.
neighborhood,
Mhm.
wherever you can, just lift one another up, and just, be conscious of our actions and our words, and try to lift people up, because it's
That's
a
what I try to do.
we're going to need each other.
Absolutely. Ann Bush says she was telling Stacy that she's in a community of Black women in tech that support one another. We don't allow stereotypes to determine how we move.
Yeah, and I know
Absolutely. And
Black women in
again,
tech, I know that's hard. That is a
yeah,
very male dominated field.
right. And the other thing too, like I said, in any facet of our lives, I can tell you that I really try to go all out of my way to support other people, period. Black women, white women, whatever. If I like you and I know of you and there's something, I'm an encourager and I try to encourage everybody. But I notice that I don't necessarily get that back. But here's the thing, you can't worry about it. You just can only do what's in your heart to do. You
Yep.
know, you can't worry about who's not going to encourage you tomorrow or whenever, because often you don't get it. If that is in your nature to do be that type of person, and you have to get comfortable with it and say it's okay, because I all I can be is accountable to me and how
Yep.
I choose to show
Yep.
up for others, period.
Yep.
That's all I can do.
Absolutely.
Ron White says, call people out. Yes. I
Yeah,
can't
and
remember what we
and
were
we
saying.
have to start to, unfortunately, we have to, start to call out the folks who are, willing to let their own egos get in the way of what's best for our community as a whole.
Right.
Because we don't have time for that. And what's interesting is Black folks, we've really only had the right to vote since about 1965, because in theory Black men got the right to vote in 1870, but we saw what happened there. Black
Yeah.
women got the right to vote in 1920, but we saw again what
Yeah.
happened
Yeah.
there. So most Black folks couldn't vote until the Voting Rights Act was passed in
That's right.
1965.
And that's not long at all. That's not even 60 years.
Exactly. And the thing about that is, because we haven't had that power this long, we
Mhm.
haven't had the power for that long, I think
Uh-huh.
some of us tend to get frustrated more easily. Whereas white men, it's like they treat the power as their birthright, right?
Yes,
It's like,
they do.
yeah. And so we are going to have to start to vote, not just like our rights depend on it, but like it's our birthright too, because it is. Were
It
any of us
is.
involved in writing the Constitution? No, we were not. Bill of Rights? Nope.
We were
Declaration of
not.
Independence? No. But our blood, sweat, and tears built this country.
Yes,
So
it
we
did.
have
For
just as much
free.
right to this country as anybody else, if not more. So
Right.
we have to exercise our birthright to say, no, this is our version of America, and this is what we want America to look like. But that only works if we get out and make our voices heard and vote, 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 vote. And I hate to say it again, but vote.
That's right. No, you keep saying it because I believe in it. Ron says, I'm behind a strong woman 100%. She's behind me. It's a two-way thing. Shame on any man that doesn't support his woman.
Yeah, and
That's
and
right.
I appreciate you saying that, Mr. White, but a lot of men don't feel like that, even Black men, because it goes back to that white patriarchy. So
Mm-hmm.
many. I love Alice Walker in The Color Purple. She
Mm-hmm.
said that one question that nobody ever asked her was how Mr. got to be the way he was. So there's that scene with Mr.'s daddy, on the porch. She said, but you notice he's light skinned. The backstory is that his daddy was the master, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
that's where he learned all the evilness and everything that he passed down to Mr. Seeley's husband. And I think that a lot of Black men to kind of get wedded to the idea of patriarchy. It's like, well, I know that outside of the home, all this is going on, but at least I'm at the top here. I'm at the top in the community. We got to
Mm-hmm.
get rid of all of that and just say, whoever is here and for Black people and willing to work, come on. You could be a deacon, a drag queen. Come on. We need everybody to do
Mm-hmm.
whatever is necessary to get this community moving in the right direction.
Well, that kind of ties into Stacy's. She says this is her last question. Where are the Black leaders? I don't know if we have them like of days of old.
Yeah.
We it's not quite the same, and I understand your concern about it, and I feel some kind of way about it too, but I just say that we're looking at them when we look in the mirror, that we all just have to stand up and work together somehow. And whoever is a good leader at that juncture, we coalesce around them and we help them and help lift them up. I don't know where there's another Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And
I know of one young man here in North Carolina who is a phenomenal young man. And I can't think of Greer's last name, but he is a phenomenal young man here in North Carolina. And I see him as being some great leader. He is a phenomenal leader. He's a Gen Z, and I have had him on my show, and he made me feel like, oh my God, the world's gonna be a good place. I mean, he really did. He's a great kid. He's a great kid, and I respect him so much.
And that's what I think too, that these kids that are coming along, the young, I mean, the ones that were like coming around like 17, 18, like, I think they really, I think I am scared of these kids, because I think that these kids, it's been sort of like, I know when I studied political science, and it's sort of been like one of those, things that they always say is young people don't vote, right? Ever since they lowered the voting age to 18, like, well, young people don't vote anyway. I think we're about to see a huge change in that,
I
because
pray
Gen
so.
Z don't play.
If
Gen Z is very different
yes,
in the way that they look at things.
Listen, Tiffany Cross had on her show 2 Gen Zs that are running for offices. I can't remember where, but they have a whole little system that they've got going. And I need to go back and find that show on YouTube, because I want to talk to them. I felt so good. They made me feel better,
Yeah.
And just like Greer Webb is his name. Greer Webb. You probably seen Greer has done a whole bunch of traveling this summer, and I'll have him on again soon. But he's a phenomenal young man, and I see where he's just going to be. He has that light, just like I saw those other young men have that light. We have some talented people. Ron says many black leaders have been bought and paid for, and that is the absolute truth. We've had so many ministers and what have you that have not spoken the truth to power about Christian nationalism and white evangelicalism, because they're too worried about monies that they're receiving from whatever sources. And
absolutely.
I had my pastor on, who is he is a scholar, and he wrote a book called, here it is, Call to Reconciliation. We had him on, and he here it is, the book Call to Reconciliation by Jonathan C. Augustine. It is a small book. Let me see. It's small but mighty. Small but mighty. It's not that many pages in it, but he breaks down the whole thing about Richard Nixon and all the cycles that parlayed into that, and how we got to MAGA.
Mm-hmm.
From Nixon on,
And
just
I
like we're
think
talking
that
about that election.
I
Narissa,
wish
we
that
have
we
been
had
talking. Girl, you know it's 9:14. But listen, go ahead and wrap up, and we'll.
I am going to wrap up with a few thoughts. Thought number one, really quickly, is that I think it's amazing that we have to talk about the church too, because one of the crazy things about this Dobbs decision is that it takes one view of religion, a very narrow view, and makes it the law of the land. In the Roe decision, for those of you that have read it, one of the things that they went out of their way to say was, we looked at all the different religious texts. We looked at the Bible, we looked at the Torah, we looked at the Quran, we looked at things from different religious leaders, we looked at things from philosophers, doctors. No one can agree when life begins from a scientific, religious, philosophical. So we're not going to touch that. They said, we're just not going to do that. And then in 1991, when they revisited Roe in a case called Casey, they said, you know, that we said in Roe is still true. We still can't say when life begins. They said we can say that there's viability. They said we know that. We know when the fetus can live outside the mother on its own. Said, but other than that, we don't have a benchmark. And so that's why they say in Casey, before viability, a woman has a right to an abortion. After viability, the state can restrict it in a lot of different ways. That used to be the benchmark before a couple weeks ago, I think it's been 2 weeks now since Dobbs. But that's one thing. The other thing I want to say before we wrap up is that before I was talking to Miss Pam, I wanted to find something out. Texas has officially banned abortion now because they had one of those trigger laws. So I wanted to go to a website and see where you would have to go. You would have to go to Wichita, Kansas, or go to Tennessee if you live in Texas. Those are the closest places to go,
they banned it there too.
All the other, well, in Tennessee, I guess it's coming. So it hasn't taken yet. So remember, some of these things have taken time to come in. But for right now, you can go to Kansas or Tennessee. But yeah, these other ones, they're coming. So it's going to be very difficult. And there's already, women's health providers who are just pulling their hair out because they know that there are women who need these services. And they've known for years that there have been women who would be protesting outside one day and come in the clinic and get services. It boggles the mind. But just to say that we have to be mindful, and just those women are going to need so much help and support. And so we just got to be there, for them.
Listen, Narissa, I have enjoyed you 1,000, a trillion, gazillion %. This has been so wonderful. And this subject isn't over with because we didn't even get into the 10-year-old and her in Ohio and what's going to happen to the man. We keep hearing about the 10-year-old. I want him up under the jail. And it's just so much going on. But we're going to address this some more. We have to, because it's an ever evolving subject, and it's all, we need to tie all of this into these midterm elections that we have to vote for. And I plan on having some candidates from North Carolina, Michigan, and Georgia that I've been trying to talk to come on the show. And I would love for you to come back, of course.
I would love to. Thank you.
I have so enjoyed this. Thank you for reaching out to me. I appreciate it so much. Guys, if you enjoyed this show, please hit the thumbs up. Please, please, please go to my YouTube channel and help me grow that YouTube channel. And by doing so, that just helps everything. So hit the thumbs up on the YouTube channel and subscribe and share my video. Share it with other people. Share it on your social media links so that more people will learn about it and even consider come on the show, because we learn by educating one another. And we can't get it all from the big national shows. So little guys like me, hey, we'll bring other people into the fold, because everybody's opinion matters. Everybody has so much great information to share. I thank you so much, everyone. And
Thank you
I'm going to
so
say
much.
good night, and you guys stay tuned for next week's show. Good
Yeah.
night.